Welcome back, everybody. We are working our way through period 1 of the APUSH curriculum, and we are going to focus today on topic 1.4 Columbian Exchange, Spanish Exploration, and Conquest. So let's get into that topic. So our guiding question we're going to focus on with this topic is very simple. It's what were the causes and effects of the Columbian Exchange? And I know you've heard of the Columbian Exchange before. You learned about it probably in, I don't know, 6th or 7th grade or something. It really is one of the most important events we're going to cover all year. It left a huge impact on the world. So on the basic level, what the Columbian Exchange is this movement of things and people across the Atlantic between the so-called Old World, which we refer to Europe, also Africa. Sometimes we just kind of lump Europe and Africa together and call it the Old World. And even things from Asia that the people from Europe had gained access to. So basically, it's everything on those three areas, Europe, Asia, Africa, all together, and then the New World. This would be North America, South America, the Caribbean, and those areas right there. So again, it's a transfer of plants, animals, diseases, and what triggers it, of course, is Christopher Columbus's voyage. That's why it's called the Columbian Exchange. As soon as Europeans had access to North America, everything changed. And you can see a list of some of the items that were exchanged. You've got bananas and grapes and peaches and even bees going from this area, and then back we've got things like potatoes and, of course, corn and turkeys and just massive movement. Another one I want to point out, of course, that's going to be very, very important would be the horse. Once the horse arrives, this is going to have a big impact on Native Americans and how they live, particularly out in those plains. So we talked about in a couple of videos ago about how they were largely mobile and constantly moving, and they're hunting the bison. Well, the horse is going to be just a huge upgrade to what they had been doing. Disease is something that we're going to focus on a little bit. It is pretty extensive, the number of diseases brought from the Old World to the New. Now, again, that is unintentional. It's not that they were bringing boxes of typhus with them or something. This is just something that the Europeans would have brought with them unknowingly, and the Native Americans, of course, had virtually no immunity to almost any of these diseases, and it's going to just run like wildfire through those environments. Now, one more note on the Columbian Exchange before we kind of move on to some other issues. It is interesting to think about how this changed food. For example, when I think of Italian food, I think of a lot of tomatoes, right? Think of Italian food, how critical tomatoes are. Tomatoes were not even known to Europeans, Italians specifically, until the Columbian Exchange. When I think of Ireland, I think of potatoes, right? Well, Irish people had never seen a potato prior to the Columbian Exchange. The Swiss, we think of them with chocolate. Belgians make a lot of good chocolate. Germans make good chocolate. Well, they didn't have that. So that's all something that's going to come this direction. There's just a little political cartoon here of the Columbian Exchange, kind of pointing out that the Europeans are going to probably benefit a lot more. Well, there's no doubt about it. The Europeans are going to benefit tremendously from this exchange, and Native Americans not as much. So let's look at some of the effects. I mentioned this a moment ago, that with all these new foods arriving in Europe, it's going to change how Europeans live in terms of their diet. New foods always, it's going to round out your diet. It's going to make you less susceptible to disease. It's going to result in more people living longer, having more children that survive into adulthood. So with the Columbian Exchange, you're going to see a pretty noticeable population growth. It's going to continue for a couple of centuries. Again, Columbian Exchange, we're thinking like kind of right about here is where it's going to start, and there's the big arc. One more effect for Europe. As the Europeans arrive in the New World, they are going to find lots and lots of raw materials, and particularly gold and silver. And this is going to enrich the Europeans almost beyond belief. The Spanish had these treasure ships that would sail back from the New World with literally tons of silver and gold on board. And you can see also over here how this is going to connect Spanish colonies out in Asia. So we've got Asian trade coming across the Pacific, and then of course transatlantic trade going this way, and the New World is kind of sandwiched in between those two. Another effect for Europe with the Columbian Exchange would be a shift in their economic and social structure. With all this influx of cash in from the New World, it's going to just totally transform the economic system, going from the old feudalism model, which you may remember learning about from an earlier grade, where you have this very rigid social structure and lots of obligations from the nobles to the vassals to their serfs and all these things. That's going to start kind of phasing out as we get into the 1500s, 1600s, and it's largely gone by the 1700s. And instead, what's going to happen is we're going to see a shift to capitalism. Now, this is not, again, it's not like you flip a switch and you go from feudalism to capitalism. It's a long, centuries-long process, but it really does begin with the Columbian Exchange, because with the Columbian Exchange, you have, again, this massive influx of cash into Europe, and if you were an entrepreneur, you can take some of the cash and you can invest it, and you can build something up and make more profit. You can hire more people, and those workers, of course, take their wages, and then they can buy more products. They can even open businesses of their own, and that's what capitalism is all about. Well, another effect of the Columbian Exchange on the Europeans would be the joint stock company. This is actually a really good example of what we were just talking about with capitalism. A joint stock company is basically analogous to a modern-day corporation, in that instead of having a single owner, you have investors. So you invest your money in a company. This allows the company to pool all that wealth. They can build up the company. They can build more ships or whatever that happens to be their factories or their company is all about. And as an individual investor, you only lose what you invest if, in fact, the company goes belly up. So it's kind of limited liability on your side. And these joint stock companies are going to be the key to establishing several colonies across the America, including Jamestown, we're going to talk about in a later lecture. So here are your explorers heading off all across North and South America and Central America. Again, you don't have to remember all these names, but we are going to look at some of these later on. Like we'll mention Jacques Cartier with the settlement of New France in a later topic. But this is where it all starts. With these Europeans exploring and conquering comes this Columbian Exchange. So we looked at some effects of the Columbian Exchange on Europeans. What about Americans? And by Americans, I don't mean you and I mean Native Americans. And as we talked about earlier in the video, the arrival of the horse is going to be just so transformative in how the Native Americans trade, move, farm, fight, you name it. Another thing I want to throw out there, because this is going to be a big topic in a little later video, is the arrival of sugarcane. Sugarcane is a very labor-intensive product. It's also a very profitable product. And that desire for profit, but also a need for a labor system, is going to have a big impact on the Americans. The conquistadors, people like, say, Hernan Cortez, they are going to come over to the New World. They're going to explore and conquer. That's what conquistador, of course, means. And not just like little tribes here and there, but they're going to take down vast empires. The conquistadors are going to defeat the Aztec Empire of modern-day Mexico. They're going to defeat the Incan Empire, which was the most extensive pre-Columbian civilization in the Americas. This vast civilization is taken down by relatively few Europeans, because the Europeans had so many advantages we'll look at a little bit later. I did want to mention one thing about the Incan, however. Despite the fact that they had this vast empire going down the west coast of South America, they did not have a written language. Instead, they did have one means of record keeping. They're called quipu, and they are literally knots that you would that you would tie, and this would be a means of record keeping. This might be like for example, like a sales receipt. You bought this guy's 4 llamas or something, and this would be your proof of that transaction. All right. So, other effects of the Columbian Exchange on the Americas. Of course, the biggest one, the most long-term one, the most tragic one, is the exchange of diseases. Europeans just bring a whole bucket full of diseases that run rampant across Native Americans. And historians estimate that upwards of 90% of all Native Americans would eventually die from these diseases, like smallpox in particular. You can see these are smallpox survivors. Again, this was unintentional, of course, but that doesn't make it any less tragic. And a lot of a lot of Native Americans died of these diseases without ever setting their eyes on a European. They traveled along trade routes, and so they would just run so quickly. When the Europeans sometimes would arrive in these villages, it would just be abandoned because everyone had died way before the Europeans had ever arrived. So that was a quick overview of the causes and effects of the Columbian Exchange. Remember, it's all about the movement of animals and plants and diseases across the Atlantic in both directions.